what do you think the future of go-to-market looks like? And especially with how loud it's gotten, like, what do you think it looks like moving forward?
I think scaling, like sharing and having your happy customers tell other people and recommend other people and like equipping them with ways to do that. I wish we did more of that in hindsight. Like, I think that was such a jackpot for us that we leaned into it. But I just think in hindsight, we probably could have leaned into it even more and done even more there. And I think to your point, that's such an interesting way to break through the noise. I do think events and in-person is super important, and any event you see happening in your city, just like buy a ticket and go. You know, like your company doesn't have to be buying a $25,000 booth and sponsoring all the stuff at an event. Like just go buy a ticket for $500 and take the train in and just like go to the event and go meet people.
Tom, great to see you. Absolute pleasure having you on the show. Tom Coburn is the founder of Jebbit, and Tom and I met, was it probably a year and a half ago at this point, when I was working at Klaviyo, and I had referred a few folks over to the Jebbit side for some zero-party data collection. And yeah, big fan of everything that you built at Jebbit, and really lucky and fortunate to have you as someone who advises us and kind of shares their insights on business, and has been just a great mentor to Jared and I. So without further ado, Tom, pumped to have you on the Revenue Room.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat. Excited for what you guys are building at First Touch.
Cool. So, the press up of the show really is to talk about kind of some of the earlier days, but really to talk about what it was like to go from founder-led sales and finding that initial traction, and then really understanding and knowing when it was that time to add gas to a fire. And so maybe if we can walk back towards the early days, I know you started Jebbit when you were a sophomore in college at BC. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what it was like initially starting that business, and when you first realized like the initial business model wasn't going to be the one that was going to take you to the finish line.
Yeah, I think there's a few different themes we can hit on here, because one could be around founder-led sales and all of that and how we got things off the ground. But the other, as you were hitting on, is our story is not one of those stories of it being like a very clear product vision from day one, right? We weren't industry experts. We weren't out there like working in the field and seeing, oh, this is the exact problem and the exact need. And like a lot of startup stories, we were just young and wanted to build a company and wanted to find product market fit. And we were really just searching for anything that we could build a big business around. And so our very first product that we launched, which was actually the product I dropped out of college with, and the product we raised $2 million of funding on from a lot of local VCs and angels in Boston, was really just a website for college students where they could come in and engage with brands, answer questions, complete challenges, and earn money. They'd earn a rate of like $20 an hour, and we would only charge brands when people engaged. And it was a great little business for us to get off the ground, but we realized a couple of years into that was never going to be kind of the big scalable tech company that we were aspiring to build. And so in late 2013, after taking on a couple $1 million of funding, we sat our investors down and said, hey, these are all the problems we see in this business, and we want to start the process of pivoting and finding something new. And thankfully, we had an awesome group of really supportive investors that listened patiently and then helped guide us and support us on that process of finding something new.
And what did that process of finding something new look like? Like, did you talk to a bunch of businesses? Did you kind of figure out what it was going to look like based on what you had done for the past couple of years?
Yeah. So maybe to set the scene a little, the team was like 10 people, of which maybe, half of those were engineering product type roles. And so there was really just like me and my co-founder and a couple other people that were out like doing sales, doing customer success, talking to customers and potential customers. And so, yeah, I mean, we had a nice niche of customers at that time. We probably had like 100 customers, and we were doing about $1 million a year in revenue, but it was all campaign based. It would be a dating app that wanted to reach college kids, and they'd spend 10, 20 grand at a time to reach students on our app, and then, or on our website, sorry. And then, once the money ran out, just like you'd kind of fund a new Instagram campaign, we'd have to go back to them and fund more. And so when we decided we wanted to make the pivot, we had about we had burned through like half our funding. We had like $1 million of funding left. We knew we wanted to stay somewhat in the world of still marketing technology and working with brands and helping brands reach consumers and engage consumers in a better way. We just were running into some very clear challenges of like, we weren't a SaaS business, so we're constantly chasing, the next campaign. We were a marketplace, so we had to actually get the students to our website and get them there in kind of equal balance to the brands. And of course, not every brand wants to reach every demographic of students. So, your pool's getting smaller based on their targeting. But the biggest thing is we just were realizing that the college students were there for the wrong reasons. Like, even though we were driving great engagement metrics, clicks, time of engagement, questions answered, et cetera, like we just knew from talking to our users, most of them were just there to get their beer money for the weekend. And we weren't really building genuine connections with the brands. And so we went off on this journey that honestly, I thought was only going to be 3 to 6 months to find our new product. It ended up taking 2 to 3 years, depending on where you want to draw the line of when we figured it out. But, we had the general themes of we still want to sell to brands. We still want to help them connect with consumers. And we want to do it in a way that's more genuine, where we're not paying for their attention directly and where, the business model wasn't a marketplace. It sounded easier than it was, but, eventually we landed on, the version of Jebbit that most people know about today.
So with that initial start, right, get to $1 million in revenue. What size of businesses were you typically working with? Like, were those relationships the ones that propelled the early version of the new product forward?
It was so within that 100 customers ish. And yeah, to kind of go back to what you were asking about before too, like, so we started by just going to all of them and talking to them about what we were thinking of pivoting to and why and what their challenges were, et cetera. But within that customer base, it was a pretty wide range. I would say maybe 10 of them were like big, like Fortune 500 brands we all know. Like Bose was the first big one we landed, Reebok, New Balance, big brands like that. I would say most of them, though, if you went down the other 90, most of them were more like D2C brands, smaller up and coming brands. I mentioned a dating app before. We had a few different like dating apps on there, a few different like e-commerce brands, different D2C brands. A lot of it was your kind of more up and coming more digital native brands that were trying to reach a young college audience and, had budget to spend, but it wasn't the multi-$100 million, multi-billion dollar budgets of, giant Fortune 500 companies.
Awesome. So, like, as you thought about this new product, did you have kind of a vertical in mind, or was it more built around the customer base that you had? I guess just would love to understand a little bit more about like the direction that you ended up taking.
Yeah, we were not targeting any specific vertical at that time. I actually think one of the painful lessons I learned over the years that I probably wasn't smart enough to adapt earlier on was the benefits of being much more focused with who we were targeting. I think we were young and ambitious and a little bit naive, and we should come back to this when we talk about the difference between founder sales versus scaling a sales team, because I found it was way easier for my co-founder and I to context switch and sell into lots of different verticals and lots of different size companies than it was our sales team once we started building out a team. But to directly answer your question, no, at that time it was just about any vertical under the sun, so long as that vertical was trying to reach college kids. I mean, we weren't targeting like, B2B cybersecurity companies or things like that. But really anyone that wanted to reach college kids was our demographic then. And yeah, could have been a big Fortune 500 brand, could have been a small startup. We were really willing to talk to anyone. Obviously, once we started to make the pivot, we kind of dropped the whole college kid angle. But we did kind of always stay in the B2C world. We never really tried to target a B2B customer base. But yeah, I mean, other than that, just saying B2C still leaves a a very, very wide open pool of customers when you're not defining the verticals in a more specific way and you're not defining company size in a more specific way. I mean, to cut to the end where Jebbit ended up building a pretty big business was in, enterprise CPG and enterprise retail e-commerce businesses. That's like where we eventually got focused on. But in this time where we were trying to pivot and find product market fit, we were all over the place there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's probably pretty common, right? Like even Jared and I, even First Touch, like, we've talked with so many businesses and so many industries to try to figure out where does First Touch fit best? Where do we provide the most value? And I think like it's an important exercise to go through, right? It's hard to just skip to one assumption, especially really early on when there's so many different opportunities and pathways. And it's like, which one is going to be the best? You don't know until you know. Um, so I think that that's probably a good place to go deeper there. Like, what did it look like in the beginning, right? You've got this new product, you're starting to find some traction, and you're like, hey guys, like, I think we're ready to start putting some gas on the fire and bringing on a sales team. Like, what did that process look like for you, early on?
Yeah, so for us, like I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it really took us like at least 2 years to go from, being this website paying college kids to engage with brands to, really the SaaS offering we landed on. The core of it was an offering for marketing teams to build quizzes and other types of interactive experiences, answer 5 questions and find the right snowboard for you. Type example. Gonna use snowboarding as the
Nice.
example there. We probably, I'm trying to think back, you know, the team was small. Like I mentioned, it was me and my co-founder and maybe like 2 sellers that were just out there talking to people every day. And we would just come back. I remember we'd meet up like every Friday night and just like recap our week. Who's everyone you talked to this week? What type of trends are we seeing? We would just like grab beers, sit there with a whiteboard and start like putting sticky notes up on like whatever trends we were seeing. And that helped us really start to uncover. I mean, maybe not surprisingly with that example, it was a lot of like digitally native e-commerce brands that started really forming the initial customer base, but it was still a wide range of how big they were and how much budget they had. But I think once we got that to around probably 1.5 million to 2 million of ARR. That's when and by the way, during that process, we totally shut down the other product that was doing about $1 million a year, which is another hard decision. But once we got there, that's when we went out and like raised our Series A and started really thinking about scaling up the sales team and, hiring, I don't know, at the time it was probably like 5 or 6 AEs, something like that, to start to try to like build out a more professional go-to-market sales org. And that is when we were really staring down the very obvious decision of, well, it was obvious that a decision had to be made, not what the right decision would be, but there was the obvious decision of, do we want to go for more of these like Reebok, New Balance, like big enterprise brands? Or do we want to go for the much higher volume but lower price point, like SMB mid-market cohort? And there was probably a 6-month period where our management team was heavily debating that decision and which direction we wanted to go.
So what was the process like of that 6 months, right? Like what were those conversations like? One, I would imagine more for enterprise, one for these SMBs, and like where did you guys end up landing?
By this point, we had actually established a separate customer success team. One of my co-founders, Michael, who had started doing sales, had come to the obvious conclusion that every SaaS company comes to, which is we should have a separate dedicated team to customer success and not have all of our sellers worrying about making the customers they've signed, successful. And so a lot of the narrative was being driven by him. I think Michael really stepped up to say, hey guys, we have 2 vastly different cohorts of customers right now, and they are demanding very different levels of service. They're requesting totally different sets of features. And I think, to be honest, me, who was more on the sales side, I think we were a little bit blind to that at the time. I think we were more just out there talking to anyone that would talk to us and selling any deals we could sell. And so I think Michael did a really good job of organizing some combos with us. We had some good debates. Um, Ultimately, I don't think our decision making was much more complicated than the mid markets and SMBs were demanding just as much time from Michael and his team, if not maybe even slightly more in terms of their expectations they had. And at this time, our product was not as nearly as self serve as it eventually became. So it was a little bit more hands on in terms of servicing the customers and getting their quizzes built and live on their website and making sure it was successful and it looks the way they wanted and it interacted the way they wanted and all of that. And so, I mean, the enterprises were paying 10, sometimes 20x per month what the SMBs and mid markets were paying. And so I think it was just the pretty simple calculation of if it's the same amount of time, but they're spending 10 to 20x per month, let's go after the bigger ones. And the real question was just, did we have enough confidence in our ability to break into those bigger ones and turn what was, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 enterprise customers at the time into, hundreds and eventually thousands. And so that was really the debate. But me and my other co-founder, Jonathan, who were more leading the sales side of things, we felt like we could do it and we were confident in our ability to break into big brands. And so, we made the tough decision to say, okay, we're going to be an enterprise company. We're going to really focus on, at the time it was travel, e-commerce and CPG. And then, travel once COVID hit became less of a focus. And we really just organized the whole sales team and the whole marketing team around being an enterprise company and going after that. It obviously really streamlined the product team on prioritizing enterprise features and what enterprises were looking for. Like, I think looking back, that decision to get really focused and say no to an entire cohort of size companies, SMB and mid-market, and just go after enterprise and put that stake in the ground, I think it was a really important rallying cry for the team and was one of the, there was a ton of mistakes we made, but I think that was one of the better decisions we made to go for that.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of smaller businesses, will go after enterprise, but obviously it's really difficult, right? Because you're dealing with large procurement teams, you're dealing with budgeting, you're dealing with multi-threading. Like, it's not an easy persona to sell into as an early stage business. So what were kind of the hurdles for you and the team selling into enterprise and being able to get your foot into the door?
The hardest part was honestly just breaking in and getting the first like 5 or 10. And that's where I'll give my co-founder Jonathan a lot of credit. He came up with this, in hindsight, like pretty clever idea of we created a CMO advisory board. And what he basically did was he went out and found recently retired CMOs of major Fortune 500 companies. And then he recruited 6 to 8 of them probably to be our CMO advisory board. And we gave them a little bit of equity. We met with them quarterly. And then their job was to go walk us in the doors of CMOs that were their friends that were still running big Fortune 500 companies and get us meetings. And, that helped give us like the clout in the getting in the door. And then it was just up to us to go in and be, you know, the young, energetic founders we were and share the product vision and share what we were working on. And they'd meet the team. And that combination worked really well. Once we kind of landed, I'll say the first 5 or 10, then it was easier to break in on our own, whether it was from intros from our current customers or whether it was just from, you know, I mean, this, just being able to like send an outbound email and say, hey, here's some of our big customers. We're working with L'Oreal and Procter and Gamble and Nestle. And to be able to send that to another CPG brand, when they see that and they see the examples you're live with, you get a much higher response rate and a much higher hit rate. There were, of course, challenges we had to learn around just what enterprises require, SOC 2 compliance and, different types of permissioning and security and, being able to scale the platform globally and have users from all over the world use it and create quizzes in different languages and all of that. Like that's like a bunch of the feature set that the enterprises were pushing for that the SMBs weren't asking us about. But that's where like my co-founder and our CTO Matt and our head of product John, like they just did an awesome job of getting that list of requirements and knocking them out and communicating well with these big global organizations to make sure we were checking the right boxes and staying compliant. ADA compliance, that was a big one that the big enterprises care about that smaller companies just aren't thinking about.
That's a really like brilliant early go-to-market strategy with the CMO advisory board. So basically you were leveraging referrals, but bringing them into your ecosystem, incentivizing them. On the flip side, were you also building customer stories and case studies with those initial businesses to be able to tell their story like at scale?
A ton of that. Yeah. Like, and that's actually I kind of breezed over how the story happened. We actually proactively chose retail and travel as our two verticals. We actually didn't choose CPG, but we were lucky enough to. I actually almost didn't even respond to the email because I thought it was spam at first. I got an email from a company called Pilot 44. They're one of those companies that will go partner with a giant org like a P&G, learn their challenges, and then go find startups that can, help them hit those challenges. And so we actually met Procter and Gamble through them. Procter and Gamble was our first CPG customer we closed, which we were just like very lucky to have serendipitously met them through Pilot 44. And then they had a lot of really early success with us, and they brought me to CES with them. We did like a public case study. We talked on stage there, and that really just kickstarted our business in CPG, which CPG ended up becoming our largest vertical as we added, Nestle and L'Oreal and Colgate, and you just go down the list of all the other, big CPG brands. But that was one where, whatever the saying is, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Like, thankfully, I responded to that email and we went and pitched, and we were one of like 30 startups to pitch, and we were one of the couple that they chose. And so that's where I think like it's also important to just be nimble and be responsive. And like once we landed that, I think we had the hunch of, okay, if they're willing to go public with us and if they're willing to talk about this work, because really what they hired us to do was go capture more first party data. And it was right at the time where, GDPR and CCPA and all this legislation was becoming a big thing. And they wanted everyone to know we're treating our customers with respect and transparency. And we're using innovative startups like Jebbit to, be on the right side of history and get first party data. So it was really just like a great win-win for both of us to be able to be out there and be talking about that.
That's awesome. So at what time was this? Was this like before the Series A, after the Series A? Like what part of the journey was that at?
It was after the Series A. We probably did the first pilot with P&G in like 2018, 2019. That CES where I went to where we did a bunch of stuff together. It was either 2019 or it might have even been 2020. It was definitely before COVID. It was post Series A, but pre us doing any of the big like private equity raises that we did.
Cool. Yeah, that's a really like a great journey, right? To go from where you started to kind of finding that nugget and like really doubling down on it.
We had probably made that decision to be enterprise first like 2 years earlier. And if we hadn't, there's just no way we're able to land that business with P&G, right? I mean, they're able to see right through whether you have all the, SOC 2 compliance and all the security things you need and all of that. And so thankfully, and this is where it just happened serendipitously, like thankfully by the time Pilot 44 reached out to us and P&G was interested in capturing first party data, we'd had 2, maybe even 3 years under our belt of really being an enterprise first company, only building for enterprise brands, learning how to service them, learning what features they were going to care about, with obviously much smaller enterprise brands than a P&G, so that by the time they came around, we were ready for it. And I mean, we still had to do a bunch of work and jump through a bunch of hoops because they had a whole different level of privacy clearances and things we needed than any other enterprise we had worked with at that time. But once we got the global vendor approval status with them, then it was really just an easy like badge of honor than in any other sales call. Our sales reps were just able to say, oh yeah, we're a global approved vendor of P&G. And that just kind of removed any concern, or removed 90% of the concern, I should say, of any of the other brands that we were pitching.
Right. You broke down the hardest door. So it makes all the other doors, I guess, a little bit easier and faster. Um, what was like the primary mode of booking meetings at that point? Were people coming inbound? How were people finding Jebbit? Were you going out and finding people yourselves?
We never were really able to build an amazing inbound engine. I don't know how much of that was just what we were doing versus just, the reality that like what Jebbit was doing was pretty new, and a lot of brands had to be educated on why they should go out and capture more of their own first party data, and why they shouldn't just keep relying on third party data and tracking people with cookies and other things that they were doing. So most of the business we got was either through outbounding, or where what really became our biggest thing was like customer referrals, or marketers just leaving a big company and going to another one. I mean, this is kind of the double-edged sword of the marketing world, but a lot of people at these big companies, it's kind of like a 2-year cycle and then they go somewhere else. And so we broke into entirely new verticals because, someone left a P&G or an Nestle and went to like a Merck or a Pfizer and brought us there. And now we have pharma, or left and went to the NFL or the NBA. And now we have sports and entertainment. And a lot of that was just like, do really good work for them and get them bought in on our product. And then when they go to another company, they bring us there. And it's a double-edged sword because, of course, you're losing one of your champions at one of your big customers. And so a big part of our customer success strategy and what Michael's team ran was making sure we had lots of champions in these orgs, and we weren't just reliant on 2 or 3 champions. But the benefit was, that was probably in our peak years of growth, that was probably in the 30 to 50% of new bookings were coming from, probably like 30%, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly. It was people leaving and going to other companies and bringing us there.
Yeah, I mean that's a testament to building like really strong relationships and also a product that brings outsized value to your customers. Were you guys? Did you guys have like a process around finding these folks that were leaving companies? Because I'd imagine at some point, right, you've got hundreds of customers. There's a lot of data there. Like, how were you thinking about kind of the strategy behind it, or did it just happen organically?
Yeah, in the last couple of years when I was running Jebbit, so we did a big round with Vista, the private equity fund, in 2022. And then we sold the business in 2024. I had moved into a board member role late 2024. During those Vista years, they were really good at helping us think about scaling in a more systematic way. And God, I'm totally blanking on the name of the vendor now. But yes, there is a vendor we brought on specifically designed to help us know when our clients are leaving and going to other places, and sourcing that. It will come to me later. But no, in most of the earlier years you're asking about, I'll give Michael and our customer success team a lot of credit. They were really good, like you said, at relationship building. They were really good at checking in. And it was more of just us being aware of it. Or, sometimes you just get the email from someone one day. They're like, hey, I left 2 months ago. You didn't realize it because we don't talk regularly, but I want to bring you to my new company. And to your point, that's just when you like feel the fruits of your labors of like building a great product and building great relationships and always being there for people. And you're like, oh, this is awesome. They want to bring us to their new company.
Yeah, it's one of the best feelings that you can have, and it's something that we've had a little bit of, right? So we've like 240-ish reps at HubSpot that are using us, and several of them each year, join new companies, and a lot of them have brought First Touch along with them, and that's always like the best moment when you either see a sign up or you get the email like, "Hey, I'm at my new company. We'd love to use First Touch," and it's like, nice, like that's awesome, right? It's starting to spread. Um, the other piece that I think would be great to learn a little bit about too, right? So you brought on these 6 account executives right around the Series A. Like, how much effort was put into them going out and finding their own business and going out and doing like true outbound?
It was a big It was a big part. And I think some of the AEs we learned from that didn't work out, it was they came from places where all your leads are served up to you and companies that have amazing inbound engines and that just it just again wasn't our we didn't have that luxury of that being the case. And so, definitely some of the best reps that joined in those early years, they were ones that were just willing to roll up their sleeves and go grind and go do a bunch of outbounding. For a while, we believed cold calling. We had this narrative at Jebbit that cold calling is out of date and doesn't work. And then this kid Connor joined and he just started trying new stuff, cold calling. And all of a sudden, we're like, shit, he's booking meetings left and right with big Fortune 500 brands through cold calling. And then, it was like, Connor, sit everyone else down and show them all what you're doing, And so we did that. And so, that was awesome to see. We did always I think one thing we did well is I think we did always create a very open culture, and we really valued initiative. It was one of our 4 big company values, and I think we lived that pretty well. And so when people joined, they had a pretty long leash to go figure out what they wanted their niche to be of how they were going to get meetings. And, I think one thing I learned from watching a lot of that is I think naturally just different people are better at different areas. I think Connor's amazing on the phone. He's comfortable on the phone. He's great at it. He crushed it. Some of the other reps were able to take Connor's playbook and use it and see success. Others didn't, but maybe they were really good at writing super personalized LinkedIn messages and they were just really good at finding connections through LinkedIn. Others really gravitated towards events. So events was a big part of our marketing team strategy and our AEs. The couple AEs that were really drawn to events, they would go partner with our CMO Pam and our marketing team and they'd get out to events. And some reps are just awesome at hustling and networking in person, get in the drink line, go to the happy hour, just meet people, And so we were always very open with you go explore the mediums you're excited about. Maybe to a fault, some of the people that advised us were you guys need to be much more prescriptive and much more rigid. But I think everything from the medium you use to the actual outbounding you use. We would give people training, obviously, and we would give them the high level points to make about Jebbit and we'd give them the best customer stories, but we never did scripts. We never did you all have to say it this way. And when we did get close to that, I don't know, it wasn't as much my leadership philosophy and maybe someone who ran a much bigger company and a much bigger rev org and people you'll talk to on the show will have different opinions about this. But for the scale we're at our peak, it was probably 15 reps or something in that world. I think we benefited a lot from giving people autonomy and supporting them on trying new things. And I think the right people really loved that and stepped up and loved that they had the freedom to go use their brain and try stuff and not just smile and dial the exact same script and copy and paste over and over, which, as you know, is not fun for anyone to be doing.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more too, right? I think creativity in sales is one of the most important things you can have, especially these days where there's so much noise in the market. You have to find creative ways to get in touch with people, creative ways to build relationships. I think that's true now, and it was 100% true before as well, right? Just copying and pasting the same thing and sending out 10,000 of this is really not going to make a dent, especially not now with all of the AI messaging that's in the market. So shifting gears a little bit, right? Things have changed a lot on the go-to-market side over the last year, 2 years. And I think we're undergoing a really large shift right now in what the future of sales is going to look like. I'm curious what your thoughts are, with all the perspective you've had, right? You've seen so many different stages of the business. You've navigated a lot of different environments, including COVID, including, a large pivot, raising big rounds of capital. What do you think the future of go-to-market looks like? And especially with how loud it's gotten, what do you think it looks like moving forward?
It's a broad question we could take in so many different directions. I'll throw a couple themes out there and you can tell me if you want to go deeper on any of them. But I think scaling, sharing and having your happy customers tell other people and recommend other people and like equipping them with ways to do that. I wish we did more of that in hindsight. Like I think that was such a jackpot for us that we leaned into it. But I just think in hindsight, we probably could have leaned into it even more and done even more there. And I think to your point, that's such an interesting way to break through the noise. I do think events and in person is super important. And, we were at the point as we built out a remote team post COVID, because before that, everybody was in Boston. And next thing we knew, we had, reps all around the country. Like we were really big on just like any event you see happening in your city, just like buy a ticket and go. Like there's so much you can go to that your company doesn't have to be buying a $25,000 booth and sponsoring all the stuff at an event. Like just go buy a ticket for $500 and take the train in and just like go to the event and go meet people. So I think that's really important. And then, I mean, I'm curious what your take is with what you guys are building at Burst Touch, but like on the outbounding front, this probably sounds cliche, but like I just think it has to be a mix of mediums, and I think quality over quantity. Like every time we tried to scale up outreach goals, we saw a huge hit in quality. And it lags, right? You feel great for a month. You're like, oh my God, we've had like our biggest meetings booked month ever. And then you realize like your reps are just booking poor quality meetings and they're not leading to actual pipeline, or they're not leading to actual bookings, which is what ultimately matters. And so the more we aligned our BDRs to like actual pipeline generation and actual booking, which is also hard because that stuff is further away for them and they don't control it as much. But the more we aligned it to that, that's when we had our best quarters. And we were always kind of fluctuating back and forth and testing like where we put the emphasis as a sales leadership team. But I think in hindsight, anytime we focused on quantity and numbers, I ended up regretting it. And we ended up switching back and swinging the pendulum back to something that was more quality focused.
It's a good point. I think like my perspective on it, our perspective on it, I think having a reason to reach out is really important. Uh, just like putting together a list of companies and prospects and blasting messaging at them. I don't think it worked very well previously, unless you were like like a massive brand, maybe like a Salesforce, where everyone is in your, sphere of influence. Everyone knows who you are, and they're going to respond because you're Salesforce. But I think for businesses that aren't Salesforce, and again, this is a little bit generalized, but having a reason to reach out is incredibly important. And that's really what we're focused on, is like warm outbound, right? So using internal data, understanding conversations that you've had previously, understanding when people go to new companies and new roles, like incredibly important. And then also like there's so much happening online, right? People are visiting your website. People are posting about things that are related to you on LinkedIn or on social media. And there's so many different places where you can start a little bit of a warmer conversation, but like you already know baseline that they might be interested in talking with you. And I think in a lot of ways, that's kind of where the future of pipeline generation is going to come from, especially now with like how much noise there is in the market. Like if you don't have a reason to reach out, I think those types of communications are going to be really dead for the most part.
Yeah. And I think the point you made when you referenced Salesforce, I think what we're talking about here drastically changes based on who the brand is, who you work for and who you're reaching out and where they sit in the market. I mean, I'm really proud of what we built at Jebbit, but like we were still a very small player. I mean, most people we were reaching out to still didn't know what Jebbit was, or maybe they had randomly heard about us here or there, but they hadn't done their deep research yet. And the technology we were building, while it has really amazing ROI and there's huge benefits to capturing first party data, like it's not an absolute need to have in your tech stack, right? It's not, you came from Klaviyo. It's not like the core technology of sending emails and doing like some of the things you absolutely have to be doing as a marketing team. And so I think that also, everything I just shared with you about where I wish we leaned in more and what worked and what didn't work, like that's all through the lens of what type of business we were building and what type of product we were. And I'm sure some of that still applies if you're at a Salesforce or a Klaviyo or a much bigger company, but I'm sure some of that is different just based on, who those companies are and how well known they are and how core their technology is to like, you need to have an email platform. You can't be a CMO and not have an email platform. You can be a CMO and not have a first party data capture platform, at least, still today. And so I think those are just like really important distinctions to make sure you and your team are talking about of like, where do we honestly sit in the market? I mean, everybody wants to believe their business is the absolute need to have, and their product is the absolute number one thing the prospect needs to buy, but it's not always the reality. And I think we benefited a lot from knowing that and talking about that openly and then saying, okay, that's just the fact. It doesn't mean we can't go build a big business, but those are the realities of today. So now let's use that in terms of how we think about reaching out.
A really good perspective. I couldn't agree more. But also, don't sell yourself too short. Jebbit is an awesome platform. I was a rep at Klaviyo for like 3-4 years, and Jebbit came up all the time. And for the companies that ended up using Jebbit, the customers that I signed that ended up using Jebbit, like so sticky, right? Because there was so much more data to use to better personalize communications. So I was always a huge fan. I always referred to you guys. You guys were a well-known player, especially on the Klaviyo side of things. So yeah, don't sell yourself too short. You guys were a beast.
I appreciate it. But what you're talking about and where this gets interesting, this is where you can flip what might seem like a potential weakness into a positive. I mean, our customers, like the individual people at the customers that were buying Jebbit, were getting promoted all the time. Because in their orgs, it was like, wow, you went out and found this like cutting edge, innovative technology. You just ran all these campaigns, helped us get all this first party data that we're now using. You're helping us transform off of third party data to first party data. Like we were watching people get regular promotions, calling us, literally telling us, thank you so much. I just got a huge promotion, and it's the strategy we implemented with Jebbit and the internal case studies that got it there. And so that's where we would lean on, is we would be trying to find who are the innovative people at these big Fortune 500 companies that are fine, like cutting some red tape and like running through walls and getting a new vendor onboarded and making it happen. Because there's a lot of people that work at these big companies that just don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with bringing on a new vendor. They don't want to deal with doing something super new and innovative. Now the challenge is you can't go LinkedIn search like who's the innovative person at Nestle, right? Like you have to go meet them and you have to go like actually realize, wow, like this is a person who's like hungry, wants to grow, wants to really move their business forward. And I do think that's one of the reasons why events was probably good for us is, our team could just start to identify, okay, these are the types of people, these are the characteristics that we're looking for. But anyways, that's like a whole nother dimension of prospecting that we were focused on that is not as obvious as you have this title and you work for this size company in this vertical.
Yeah, it's probably also why referrals and like champions that move to new companies brought you guys along, right? Because you identified that person in the company that was so motivated to do it.
And their work with Jebbit was often something they were talking about in the interview process, right? And so it also was just like it was just a natural fit in so many ways. We're like, they had liked working with us. They saw the clear value in the ROI. They got the case study. Now they're talking about that work when they interview. And so, yeah, I think that's all part of why that muscle was a really good one for us.
Awesome. So we got a couple minutes left, but I'd be remiss not to share this, right? So you guys ended up merging with BlueConic and got acquired by Vista last year. Like, what was that experience like for you, kind of going from the early days at BC, right? Building this startup, pivoting, growing the sales team, finding product market fit. Like, what did that culmination feel like? Did it feel rewarding? Did it feel like, oh, damn, this journey is kind of like coming to an end? Like, what were the real feelings when that process happened?
I mean, mostly all super positive. I mean, we made the concrete decision in like 2017-ish when we were kind of pivoting and finding our product market fit. We knew that what we were ultimately building was a really awesome feature to be added to more what I would say like core infrastructure in marketing. And BlueConic is a CDP, a customer data platform. And so customer data platforms was always on our list of, wow, Jebbit could be a really interesting front end to a customer data platform with it, it's not rocket science. They store and manage all the data and we help you go engage people and capture the data. And so we did our fundraise with Vista in 2022. And this was all part of the strategy we talked to them about, right? Like we're building this awesome engagement layer. It's this interactive content platform. It captures all this first party data. Here are the types of players where it might make sense for us to be bolted onto in the future. Ironically, as Vista was doing their diligence with us, they had just committed to the BlueConic investment. And so I think they announced the BlueConic investment like a month before our investment. And I remember seeing the press release and I already knew the BlueConic team. They're based out of Boston. We're based out of Boston. Like we're both in the same space. And so, it wasn't like it was not an explicit convo at that time or anything of, oh, in a couple of years we'll merge you guys together. But it was one of those things of you obviously understand that might be part of the thinking of, a big private equity fund. And so, yeah, Corey, the BlueConic CEO, approached me in early 2024 and just asked if it was something we would be interested in. And like I said earlier, that had always been part of our vision. And we had these shared investors. We were both operating very similarly, being Vista portfolio companies. My management team was seeing Corey and her management team at all the Vista management events every year. And so it was just like a really natural fit that made a ton of sense. And I was on year 13 of building Jebbit. So I always knew, I wasn't going to run it myself for forever. And so it just felt like a really natural fit for multiple reasons. And it was probably like early 2024 when Corey approached me and we closed the deal end of June, early July. So it was like a 6-month process.
Yeah, that's an awesome takeaway, right? Like almost basically 7 years in the making, right? Like when you went through this transition, you kind of had like a clear vision for what it could look like in the future. And I think another really good thing to take away from that is like, acquisitions don't just happen. You build relationships over time. Really good takeaway and learning for me too, right? Like you got to plant the seeds early and maybe plant a lot of them in a lot of different places to be able to find something that could work in the future. But Tom, awesome having you on. Awesome chatting with you. I learned a lot. This was like a really great conversation, and yeah, really appreciate you for jumping on.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.